Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today. I'm just going to give everyone a moment to kind of settle in and join. So thanks for joining us today. My name is Chantel Dresner. I am the Vice President of Marketing at Biospace, and I will be moderating today's discussion on the future of DEIB in life sciences. So if that's the session that you're looking for, you are in the right spot. So just a few housekeeping notes. Attendee phones are in listen-only mode today. Questions are absolutely welcome. Please submit them via the chat. There should be a Q&A chat. They are anonymous to the other attendees. So we will do our best to answer them in a short Q&A at the end of the session. Probably won't be able to get to all of them. I know this is a hot topic, but we will try to address as many of them as we can. So for most of you who are maybe not familiar with Biospace, we are the leading news and career site for life sciences. We've got thousands of biopharma jobs on our site, as well as daily news and deep dive insights on labor market trends, compensation benchmarking, employer branding. And this week we released our third report looking at diversity in life sciences. So exploring key issues like representation, differing perspectives, feelings of inclusion and belonging, how different professionals feel their employers are doing when it comes to diversity initiatives. And really the goal here, the one key thing that we're really trying to understand is diversity still important to life science professionals? So in 2022, the last time we did a survey and a report, 85% of respondents said, yes, diversity was important to them when considering new employment. This year, when we ran the same survey, only 68% of respondents indicated that diversity was an important factor when considering new employment. That's a pretty significant drop. And declines were actually present among both men and women, all races and ethnicities, all age groups. So it was definitely like a widespread trend rather than like just one particular group. So what we're really discussing today with this panel is how attitudes around DEIB initiatives are evolving, both in the workforce, at leadership levels, amongst those working in the diversity field. So even just a few days ago, the Washington Post had published an article about how DEI is undergoing a major rebrand at the moment. And there's a real shift in how companies are approaching DEI and how they are talking about it. So we do have an incredible group of leaders here today to offer a range of expertise and perspectives. So a very big welcome and thank you to them for joining us. And I'd really love to kick off this conversation and kind of dive right in. So it's been a very challenging year for many in biotech and pharma. Obviously, we know funding has changed in terms of the funding environment. The issues that we are dealing with this year are maybe quite different to the ones in previous years when we had these kind of boom. So how has the economy, the macro environment impacted focus on DEIB initiatives? Is it ringing true that support for DEIB generally is in decline? Suki, I will start with you if you don't mind. If you want to kind of kick us off, that would be great.
Absolutely. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're tuning in from. My name is Satsuki Shumate. Please call me Suki. I currently serve as the Director of DEI and Human Resources at California Life Sciences, and I'm really excited to be here. In answer to the question of how has the economy, macro environment impacted focus on DEIB initiatives, I would say that the socio-political pendulum in the US that swung towards equity and social justice in the immediate aftermath of the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor murders is really swinging back with force. Critics of DEI as government and corporate policy have said that this knee-jerk reaction championing new DEI initiatives was a major overcorrection, and it led to what they're thinking or what they're calling woke reverse discrimination. Right? If you look at any one of the 65 anti-DEI state bills introduced since 2023, For instance, the Senate Bill 17, it made Texas the second state in the US after Florida to ban DEI offices, programs, and training at public universities. And of course, in June of last year, we had the Supreme Court who struck down affirmative action in college admissions because they say it violated the right to equal treatment under the Constitution. In the immediate aftermath, 13 Republican attorneys general issued a letter to Microsoft and other Fortune 100 companies asking them to reevaluate their DEI policies and programs. So what's really been happening is that these boards of directors and in-house counsel for companies are going through their respective DEI programs and advising that at the very least, they downplay the racial justice and gender parity focus and move towards more of inclusion in broad strokes. And with it's not quite a recession, but with the budget cuts and the layoffs that we're having, it's really the people-oriented departments like the DEI that's being, hardest hit. And it's tragic. And, sadly for some companies, this also serves as a nice smokescreen to cover for performative allyship that was never very genuine to begin with.
Tom, what do you think? You're on the other coast. Are you seeing kind of similar things where you are?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, thank you so much for having us here. It's lovely to be amongst friends, especially our friends on the West or further afield in California. Suki's absolutely right. What does that mean, though, on the ground in reality? So as the director of DEI for MassBio, I have the privilege of being a consultant to our members. Many of our members, being fledgling or smaller companies, I meet with the DEI officer or sometimes, a committee member who's focused on DEI, someone maybe in an ERG. And there's a lot of frustration because there's been amazing work happening. As Suki mentioned, those investments, those statements, a year or two ago, and now what's in place is uncertainty. And, I consult and I look at strategy, investments, and, when we set out that 12-month plan, if I look at it now, well, the hiring of someone or, trying to celebrate more cultural awareness days, whatever it might be, those things have started to go away. And, in truth, a lot of companies have been in survival mode. We have to recognize that some of this work is long-term. Talent pipeline planning, it's a long-term strategy. And when you're in survival mode, it can be hard to kind of think about that. But ultimately, we know, as Suki mentioned, these things can swing in a pendulum. And my fear is that some companies aren't realizing that it can be very hard to reinstate and rebuild the momentum that has been created. But to end on a positive, there are companies who have done this work for a long time, who are committed, who see this as a core value, regardless of the socio-political or economic environment. And they are doing, because I'm meeting with them weekly, they are doing everything they can to maintain progress, because they care about what it means for their staff and people who look at their company and wonder, is this a company that's going to flip-flop or is going to stay the course in whatever action they're taking?
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. I'm glad to hear it. And it also makes me wonder, like with the companies, if sentiment is really changing, like amongst the workforce themselves, the people working in the field and maybe leadership, do you find that it's the strategy that they're kind of pivoting on, or are they trying to kind of mirror sentiment a little bit? Is it more the programs themselves and the initiatives that are changing, or more the communication strategy around it, or is it both?
I guess if I can pick up on my last point, the companies who have done the work, who are doing the work, who understand what it means to have promised certain support for different communities, certain initiatives, they know the harm that can be caused internally. If you think about staff sentiment, employee engagement, so they're going to do their work internally. Mm-hmm. Now, yes, the statements, when before in a job description, the DEI statement might have been at the top. Well, maybe now it's towards the bottom. But in terms of maintaining core values, that isn't changing. And for me, that's well, I think we have to kind of stand up here. And so it is possible. It comes down to choice. Choices have implications, and yeah, we're going to have to see who falls on what side of history. But what I know from these meetings with members, when DEI officers, committee members have support of leadership, everything's fine. Without that, it becomes really hard to do the work. And some of these individuals are getting quite burned out. And if they're to take themselves off these committees, if they're to leave our companies, who's left in place to do the work?
Do you think that leadership support is changing? Or that like the support coming from leadership is changing?
Yeah. For those who have been doing this for a long time, they've pinned their hat, on what we might say is the right hill. I think there is, though, an awareness that ultimately, if you're running a company, if you have a share price to protect, you have to be aware of this. And I think we'd be naive to think that we mustn't consider, some of that messaging, what's coming out from the media, anti-DI sentiment. We'd be naive to think that doesn't affect someone who's trying to run the business. But what I hear time and time again is, if we think about the customers, especially, we talk about clinical trial diversity, it's more than simply, race, gender, et cetera, within our company. It's what we represent to our customers. And that's what I think can be lost a little when we speak about these things.
Mm-hmm. Suki, Jean, I see you nodding along. Do you have anything to add?
Well, first off, I just want to say thank you again for the invite here. It is really great to be here. So Jean Santana in the DEI office at Eli Lilly, but really focused on Latinx equity as of about 60 days. So don't ask me too much about the new gig, but we're going to look to make some great impact. No, I mean, I think this is a really great conversation. It's a really complex environment out there. And I think, I think the leadership sentiment out in the industry is, to Tom's point, I think it feels like it's changing, and I think companies are going to have to continue to make decisions on what side of the hill they want to fall on. But I think you're going to find companies that when it's really truly ingrained in their company objectives and what they're trying to do, those companies find it easier to continue to talk about the work that they're doing from a DI perspective, right? So it's a really interesting time and place.
So, sorry, go on, Suki.
Oh, yeah, I don't know if the messaging so much is changing so much as the invested resources to back up that messaging. That's on the decline. So companies, I think, are trying to appear as committed as ever, but with fewer staff, less funding, less urgency. Maybe they're relying more on flashy marketing or short-lived sporadic events and initiatives to make it seem like they're still fully engaged. But they forget that the public, just like Tom and Jean were talking about, they have a really long, memory. And when they'll know, once the dust settles,
yeah.
Employees have long memories. Companies need to remember that. The ones that can keep them engaged. I mean, although a 2023 survey by the Muse revealed that 82% of respondents felt that their company's decision to pull back on its diversity commitments made them less engaged in their work, and 80% said that their decision makes them more likely to look for another job in the next 12 months. That these are things that leaders need to be aware of, because though the overall percentage of diversity being an important factor when considering new employment may be decreasing in certain, big populations, there are people who are still for whom this is very important.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I can hear you being very tactful there. I know that when we were doing the survey, there were definitely discrepancies between different groups. And I mean, I think probably most people on this call won't be surprised to hear that, diversity is still more important typically to women. It's still more important typically to people of color, amongst other groups. But, that I think that it is still important to a lot of people out there. And so it's like, how do you make sure that you're continuing to build that inclusive culture that includes all people? I mean, when we did our report, one of the things we ask is, do you agree that your company overall is committed to DEI? And that is continuing to decline. I think now it's only like 58% would say that their company is really committed to DEI, and only 56% agreed that executive leadership supports diversity and inclusion initiatives. And unsurprisingly, if you look at who agrees and who doesn't agree, again, there's pretty big discrepancies depending on, certain group characteristics. So the perspectives of people in the workforce can be very different, depending on, their lens and what they're looking at. So, as organizations, as companies that really still champion DEIB and still, see the clear value and that long-term goal, how are you now encouraging companies to create inclusive environments and to continue to strive for that? What are you recommending to them? Like if you're giving advice, what do you recommend that they do?
I can take a stab at that. Well, many of California life sciences DEI initiatives are geared towards addressing health equity and fostering a diverse talent pipeline and STEM, funding diverse innovators, etc. When I'm asked specifically about how to create more inclusive work environments, there's feedback I provide. My most emphatic message is that inclusive company cultures have to start at the top to be successful and sustaining. And you need more than just leadership buy-in and support. You need them to actively drive DEI initiatives, model the values of equity and inclusion. They have to be sponsoring their underrepresented talent, actively engaging in the DEI trainings, and have their DEI professionals report to the C-suite. Everything from recruitment to compensation to performance management promotions need to be looked at through a DEI lens. And DEI metrics, you need to really be tracking those. And something that's often not thought about is that extra burden that marginalized people carry in order to bring light to inequitable practices in the workplace. Like Tom was talking about, the burnout. You need to give them the compensation, the appreciation, the support that they need to continue to do that work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Suki's absolutely spot on. Those are the tactics. That is the right way to look at it. And I guess from a more kind of fundamental advisory or consultancy offering, I've really just tried to boil it down to three things with my members, with those who I meet. I call it my 3 R's. The first thing is to recognize actually what is the good stuff that's been done. Where did you find, employee engagement and positivity because of that? But on the flip side, what maybe hasn't gone so well, where are your blind spots? And that almost becomes your launching point. And with that, there might be some clarity on, certain issues to tackle first. So it's not, something so big and kind of overwhelming. The second is to respond. So action. People want to see action. I was told of a Michael Jordan quote by one of my DEI officers. He said, when it comes to leadership, failure is okay. Everyone fails, but not even trying is something that can't be accepted. Now, he attributed that to Michael Jordan. I'm not sure if that is a correct attribution, but I think that's right. Respond, take action. It's okay not to get everything right straight away. But employees want to be seen, want to be heard, and want to know that the company is trying to support them. And then the third R is to report. How did it go? What happened? What are you going to do next? And for me, what we're losing, I think, quite frequently here are those good news stories. Something so simple, a cultural awareness day, whatever it might be. It doesn't have to be a huge thing that needed a lot of investment, but can we start building a bit more momentum and find a bit more community in this work? Because it's that positivity that's going to keep bolstering in individuals to keep up this work, which is not easy. So yeah, just really trying to break it down. These are big, hard, meaty, sometimes very emotive topics. But what kind of strategically, tactically can we do to see some progress?
Jean, Warner, do you have anything to add? Obviously, Eli Lilly and Takeda, both real, genuine leaders in this field. For maybe people who are listening that are maybe, as Suki kind of hinted at before, maybe struggling for resource or struggling for buy-in or support potentially. Do you have any advice for, how those leaders can continue to move things forward in a positive direction?
I think, hi everyone, Warner Santiago, pronouncing him his. I'm the director of DEI for the US region at Takeda. Apologies, I had to join a little bit later because I had technical problems. I'm from my iPad, so hence the weird angle, so I apologize in advance for that. That being said, I think that it is very important to establish very transparent communications. Very, transparency is key as when it comes down to implementing DEI initiatives, and be very open and vulnerable about where you are in your journey, right? And clear and transparent about what can you achieve with the resources at your disposition. And I as a person that has a very hard time saying no, I think it is very important for us DI practitioners to be transparent and honest about our capabilities within the resources that we have at our disposition. So the priorities are well established, and also on top of that, the perception of what we can be doing as a DI practitioner is very clear, open, and honest. I think that as DI practitioner, we are often asking people to be vulnerable in certain spaces, but vulnerability has to start with ourselves, and we need to be vulnerable in order for us to ask for those vulnerabilities. So I think that will be my first advice. Second advice is also implement accountability measures pertaining and taking into consideration the resources that you have at your disposition, and after you're being transparent and honest with that, advocate for the implementation of accountability measures to ensure that the DEI goals that you have implemented as your KPI are met, in that progress is regularly monitored and evaluated. This ultimately may include a setting of very specific targets for diversity representation, conducting regular salary audits, tying executive conversations to DEI outcomes, etc. And third is also acknowledge that DEI is a persuasive line of work. And as an attorney, these can be a little bit frustrating sometimes, just because the work that we do is not legally binding. Ultimately, what we're trying to do here is expand on what the basis that the law has provided us, right? You have Title VII, you have equal employment opportunity. Those are the basis, right? And it's ultimately real and true that companies need to be in compliance with those laws. However, what we're trying to do here with DEI is expand and be more protective than those laws. And ultimately, in order for us to be a little bit more, have that real return of investment, I think is very important to translate what we do within the parameters of policies and practices. So those DEI approaches are binding within the parameters of the organization and the institution. So those are my 5 cents.
Thanks, Warner. That was great, and welcome.
Thank you.
Anything else? Started off with a bang. That was great. Anything else to add? Jean, I saw you nodding and smiling along a lot there. Anything that you'd like to contribute?
No, for sure. I mean, this is a great panel. I'm just going to reiterate on a couple of things. And then Tom, you have a client that's quoting Michael Jordan. That's a locked in client. I love that. That's the kind of people I want to work with. But no, I think just to reiterate a couple of things, building that momentum is so important. I think when you get too focused in on this big, broad goal of we're going to build an inclusive culture where every human can come in here and just feel like they can be their total selves. That is a lot of work, right? So just build momentum and small wins regardless of how small they are. It can be an education session, right? It can be reiterating some data that you saw. Whatever the case may be, it's just kind of look to build that momentum, right? At the same time, take time to celebrate those small wins and recognize the people involved in that work. This is very selfless work that you are doing for others all the time. I have to remind myself that and our teams that, right? This does weigh on you, right? This is not your full-time job for some individuals. For us, it is. We're lucky enough to be here and do this full-time. For others who are really the champions and the practitioners out there, they're scientists, they're HR people, they're in manufacturing, right? They're in finance. So we have to be able to celebrate them and help them continue to build that energy to find that energy to do this work. Because again, it's on top of them being a full-time employee, probably a parent, brother, sister, right? Whatever the case may be, there's a lot that goes on there. And then really meet people. Warren, you just said this, kind of meet people where they are in their journey and groups where they are in their journey. Earlier in my HR career, I remember I supported a commercial organization and then a research and development organization at the same time. And, my commercial side of the organization was like, okay, we're ready for phase 12 of this DEI plan. And my R&D folks were like, whoa, time out. We got to start like phase 2. So you have to meet people where they are. And there's beauty in that as well, right? Like going down that journey together. And then the last thing, it's just like, you really do have to be a partner in this work. You cannot force this work, right? Understanding where people are on their journey and kind of holding their hands throughout that is so vital. You don't want to be, there are going to be times where we do have to push in necessary times to push, right? That's what it takes to be impactful in this work, but you want to make sure you're doing that strategically and still doing that as a really, really good partner, because you really don't want to force this down anyone's kind of throat. So just kind of reiterating some of the things that the rest of the panel said.
I just say one more thing. If there really was one easy way to achieve equity and inclusion in the workplace, we would have all done that by now.
Yeah, let me know, Suki. If anyone finds it, email me. I'll do that next week.
Exactly. So there isn't one easy proven way, but the beauty of the work that we do is that it's not a zero-sum game where, if I find a good way to do it, or Tom finds a good way to do it, it's not competitive. We can share that idea and we can all grow together from that. So that's really one of the things that I love about this field is we all learn together and we all move forward together. We're not being in competition with other companies becoming the more inclusive, more diverse, more equitable organization.
There's something that I actually want to touch on. Obviously, you're all DEI leaders in your own right. This is something that you have historically been championing, so this is what you do all day, every day. You live and breathe it. For potentially talent acquisition or HR professionals that maybe don't have a DEI leader at their organization, or maybe they don't have that resources available to them. The question came in just touching on something that Warner had said is that concept of accountability managers. How do you define an accountability manager? Are they identified in the business to drive and assess DEI strategies and effectiveness, or can you kind of extrapolate on that just a little bit?
Yes, of course. So basically, accountability is part of the DEI process that you have implemented once you have identified the needs, the necessities, and the gaps in the company, and you come up with a strategy, right? So ultimately, data is a big component of what we do here, and it's also a very powerful way to not only be accountable, but also be persuasive towards the work that we do, right? So use data and metrics to track the impact of DEI initiatives and demonstrate, the effectiveness in promoting that fairness and inclusion. And ultimately, as a DEI practitioner, I like to implement that within the approach that I have already developed once I have identified those gaps. So it's also very important to understand, and this is kind of a call out for companies out there, and I understand that, resources may be limited. And the thing is that in some instances, you have communities that, in their own free time, have come up together, have put up a committee, and they're doing their best to implement the DEI initiatives just because there's not a designated person to do this line of work in the company. But let me be clear here. passion and experiences does not always equal expertise, right? And I think this is a huge thing that is happening, and one of the biggest components of this DEI drawback is the fact that we have a lot of people in enterprises doing this line of work because it's needed, but not necessarily doing it in a way that, you know, it's effective, or it's, you know, it comes up in a way that, you know, it's a way that's well developed and implemented, and, you know, people that has expertise in this. So that being said, on top of that, you know, there's the other component about the fact that it's unpaid work too, right? You also have people doing this line of work and putting an extra weight on their shoulders just because they are part of a certain minority and oppressed group or underserved group. So that being said, it's very important for us to recognize that, and you know, when it comes down to trying to move the needle here and being accountable, you need to take that into consideration. It's also the fact that it's very much dependent on the resources that you're putting into the work. So I truly would hope to have a clear answer for this, but the thing is that it's a very much a dependable kind of like approach, and it's going to be totally dependable on the resources, the expertise you have at your disposition, and also the needs and the gaps that the institution or the company has.
So something that was mentioned amongst a few of you was the fact that this is a journey and it's important to meet people where they are, given some kind of evolving attitudes. One of them being that essentially, I'll call it skepticism, or, you know, support for DEI initiatives generally is kind of in decline. You know, one of the things that I thought was interesting was when we asked people questions on their like attitudes about their employers, the bit that had the biggest change over the last couple of years was, you know, promotions awarded to employees are fair. And, you know, only 39% of people think that they're fair, right? Everyone feels like this like sense of injustice, or so when, as a DEI leader, like, you know, trying to set this example for others on this call, how do you combat those feelings of like, I don't want to necessarily say resentment, but like, how do you combat those feelings of skepticism, or, you know, calls about reverse racism? You know, because I do feel like when I was looking at a lot of the qualitative comments and feedback that were submitted, it kind of felt like a lot of it was around promotions being limited to career development. So how do you engage those people, and how do you kind of manage that sense of discontent?
I can jump in, and this is a great question. Thank you for asking that. It's so funny because, again, as an attorney, the first reaction would be like, no, this is not like that. You know, it will be a sort of defensive reaction. I'm gonna be a shark and just bite your head off. But however, I would strongly advise against that. I think that the correct way to do this is first to acknowledge and validate those feelings. You know, recognize that feelings of reverse racism or discontent in general with DEI journey may stem from a certain variety of sources, you know, including fear of change or misunderstanding of the actual goals. So validate these feelings without, you know, condoning discriminatory behavior. That's a thing. That's the first thing. Again, being completely open and vulnerable, the first time I heard it when I was a young practitioner, I was like, I instantly rolled my eyes. But
I think I did too, so don't worry.
But to be honest with you, that's not the best and most productive way to do it.
Of course.
Second, be open about education and communication, and prioritize those education and open communication about the purpose and benefits of DEI initiatives, and provide clear expectations about, you know, how DEI benefit everyone within the organization, including those who may initially feel marginalized by them. And I have a sort of an example by this. I once was being, you know, recriminated by this colleague a couple of years ago, and it turns out that colleague was a veteran. It was like, you being a veteran, you are benefiting for these DEI initiatives. It's like, am I? And I'm like, yes. And this is what we have going on to advance veteran representation within our organization. So I think it's very, very important to, be intentional about being intersectional, right? It's about being completely open and honest about the fact that in DEI goes beyond gender and race and ethnicity, and this is a common misconception. That's the instant thought that comes to mind whenever you're talking about DEI. Oh, this is to advance XYZ kind of community. And guess what? In most instances, we are also advancing your rights. You're a single working parent. You have a person. You're a caretaker of a person with a disability. You have a non-visible disability. You are a veteran, etc. It's also important to acknowledge that what we do here goes beyond those visible minority traits.
Mm-hmm.
And third point is to create safe spaces. And I'm going to go beyond that. Yeah, safe spaces, is very important. We try to foster environments where individuals can express their concerns and questions without fear of judgment. But it's also very important to create powerful spaces. And the difference between spaces and powerful spaces is that people that are not feeling safe just yet, those voices are going to be represented by the people that are feeling safe already, right? So they feel powerful to speak on behalf of those that do not have a voice represented at that particular time and place. And also, of course, again, another call out, leadership commitment. Ensure that leadership is fully committed to DEI and actively demonstrates support through actions and resource allocation. Mm-hmm. We at Takeda are extremely blessed to have a president here in the US that is extremely passionate about this line of work. And you're going to see her in our events. You're going to see her involved. You're going to see him speaking out, not only internally, but also publicly and, to the community outside of the geography of our company. So that's very important too.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of that and speaking of resources, oh, sorry, does someone want to hop in? I was just going to ask another follow-up question.
Oh, we got.
So how do you then make the case for resources? How do you make the case for resources and buy-in and support? So for someone who's maybe thinking about how do I get started, even if it's not, say it's not money, even if it's just time, like how do you even ask for the justification to spend 5 out of your 40 hours a week or whatever focusing on this? It's not necessarily just about money, right? It can be about a lot of different things. Resource can mean a lot of different things at different organizations. So what do you recommend to make that business case?
Is it me or
anyone want to hop in? I don't know.
I acknowledge that I have been taking a lot of space here, so I don't know if someone wants to jump in.
I guess I'll go, Gene,
go ahead.
Get it.
No, go ahead, Tom. All you. Go for it.
So I think what I advise is to see this like any other piece of work. Mm-hmm. If I want to hire someone, I have to justify why. I have to justify, how it's going to add to the company's performance, whatever it might be. If I want to run an event, if I want to do anything, I think we have to treat this as the same. Think about the core goals of your organization or your company or this moment in time. Is it cost saving? Is it that actually the staff sentiment isn't great at the moment? Find the thread, the golden thread, and work to that. And when I meet people who are leading this work, especially voluntarily, who are having to give up time away from the desk, away from the lab bench to do this, where they find the benefit is when they can say, I'm doing this work and I would like to give me more time to do this work because it is going to achieve our corporate goal of X, Y, or Z. Mm-hmm. For me, starting there gives you the best chance to then understand all those subcategories that trickle down effects. But start there, because ultimately that's everyone's language, especially leadership, execs, CEOs.
Mm-hmm. I think, and thank you so much for that, Tom. I think that to expand on what Tom just said, it's also very important to highlight the benefits and be very open, honest, and transparent with that. So emphasize the business case for diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, and showcase research and case studies demonstrating that, basically how diverse teams lead to better decision making and to increase innovation and to, improve financial performance and how it enhances employee engagement and also retention. You just recently, we know that within this industry, we went through what we call the Great Resignation, right? This industry became a revolving door for people, basically because in most instances they didn't feel welcome. And on top of that, also it's very important to connect those DEI goals into the DNA of the company, to the organizational goals of the company, how to illustrate how DEI efforts also align with and support the organization's overall strategic objectives. I think it's a very important thing. I think that the third point is also what our friends at Mass Bio and California Life Sciences and you, the Biospace, are doing is also showcase industry trends. It's very important to this. You're doing this. It's a very important work. So also provide instances to industry trends and best practices related to DEI, including how leading companies and competition are doing to champion diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how to gain a competitive edge. This also helps position DEI as a strategic imperative in that that is basically essential for staying ahead of the curve.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anyone can argue against the fact that people do their best work in an environment where there are multiple constructive viewpoints, where people feel engaged and respected and appreciated, and especially in the life sciences industry, where we have this public responsibility to health equity and where innovation leads to discoveries that can quite literally affect people's lives. The competitive edge, like you were saying, Warner, of that diverse, engaged workforce, it cannot be overstated.
Mm-hmm. So I kind of want to open it up now to a sort of big picture kind of question. Things have been evolving, as we've discussed. What is the future of this field? We've even had a couple of questions coming in, even just in the Q&A, about getting into this field, about getting into this line of work. How do you, in 5 years' time, do you think that support for DEI or support for this rebranded form of it, inclusion, where do you think it's going to be at? Do you think that there's going to be resources? Do you think that there's going to be will to continue to fight for that? Where do you see it? Where do you see it going? This is for all of you, by the way. So
I'm gonna jump in here, and I'm gonna bring the optimist kind of perspective. I do think it'll continue to it'll grow and stay in a positive trend. I think the data is out there showing us that underrepresented groups are growing. Immigrant talent is growing in this company, right? Or I'm sorry, in the world and in the US, and that trend's only going to go up. So organizations are going to have to continuously pivot, right? Mm-hmm. As you think back to Tom's point, how do you maintain this work? Is building that business case, just like anything else, any other part of the company that's asking for a resource. It is the same thing. You bring mm-hmm. data and you bring metrics, right? So as a part of the work I'm doing now for the Latinx community at Lilly, I've had to bring a lot of metrics to the table. One of my biggest metrics is, hey, 78% of net new workers from now to 2030 are going to be Latino, right? We got to get a lot of things right to be ready for those net new workers. We got to get our talent acquisition strategies right. We got to make sure we have unconscious bias in every single part of our HR programs and processes, right? We got to make sure we build inclusive environments that when they do get here, they feel like they're home, right? And one, to your point, we don't have another great resignation where people are leaving because they don't feel like they're a part of a company. And it's all that, right? I think I do think I see it trending positively. And I think again, organizations are gonna quickly pivot. They're gonna bring in educational resources to bring people along with things like DACA, right? Like things that are real and in front of you. So I think I do see it going in a great direction. I think the pendulum has swung maybe a little further than we'd want it to, but that pendulum always swings back, right? I think in a perfect world, we're all in that happy medium, right? Where, you know, the happy medium for our work is that there's a lot of engaged people, and there's still that frozen middle that we're bringing along slowly, right?
Mhm.
But yeah, I like to stay positive, and I kind of do see it. I do see it swinging back to the middle for sure.
Tom, Suki, what do you guys think?
I love it. I'm not going to change the sentiment. I think Jean's right, and I think we wouldn't be doing this work if we didn't believe it is still needed and there is still a future for it, especially when we think about changing demographics. I also think, as a representative of an industry, you know, the life sciences, and specifically here in Massachusetts, if other industries get this work right, and what is this work? You know, we're talking about the end goal, which is high-performing talent and people performing well because of feeling part of a great culture, or, you know, that sense of belonging. If other industries provide that, we're going to lose the best talent, or we're not going to be able to obtain the best talent. So, you know, to Jean's point, there is a responsiveness that will need to happen, which will mean this work continues. My hope is that we are proactive rather than reactive, because people can see through that quite quickly. And when we talk about talent, you know, you don't just get your senior execs straight in. There is a chance to build incredible talent that knows the company, that's been there 15, 20 years. You only keep people if there's a great environment where they want to stay. And so, to Jean's point, I really hope that we build these initiatives, build this understanding, build and find the common ground now. So in 5 years, our companies are thriving. And yes, DEI and our efforts have contributed to that, but ultimately, you know, business is good, and we're able to produce what we in the life sciences are looking to produce, you know, fantastic therapies and really helping achieve health equity, which should be, you know, the end goal.
I think that there are those who believe that the emphasis on DEI in the workplace was a direct result of the George Floyd murder. And while it's true that many organizations responded to it, the people within those organizations who drive the DEI initiatives and programming have always been there. DEI work as a vocation is nothing new. There have been cultural celebration groups, discussion groups, diversity committees, even ERGs for decades in the US. And so as long as that need is there, which unfortunately it isn't going to change anytime remotely soon, there will be people who will continue to advocate for diversity, to continue to advocate for equity and inclusivity in this and all other industries. So no, we're not going anywhere, and our will to continue to push for equity and inclusion for everyone, it's not going to diminish.
I think that to expand on that, what we're trying to do here with DEI is to be the missing link between societal changes and organizational structures. I think that in most instances, right, there's a time frame that goes by between the societal change and the implementation of initiatives in organizations and the laws. And I think that what we're trying to do here is to be a little bit more aligned of what's happening out there, right? We're going basically against the status quo. When you think about it, our very own definition of what professionalism is, and it's very much embedded in corporate America and in the organization, it is Eurocentric, it is white-centric, it is male-centric. So what we're trying to do here is to be a little bit more realistic about the fact that this industry belongs to everyone. That it doesn't matter where you come from, you belong here, and we need to be that, you know, missing link between that societal changes in parameters, lines of thought, and what's happening in the industry. Another kind of like call out, it's very important to be very collaborative with what we're doing here and not be isolated. Yes, we're talking about you know, DEI in the life sciences, but it is very important for us to collaborate and be in partnership with, you know, different companies in other areas, academia, government agencies, nonprofits, and also be very open about the fact, or be very open about what other countries are doing. Another thing that we're trying to do here is, you know, DEI in some instances is very US-centric, and a lot of these companies are global. right? We have people all over, and the necessities and the gaps are going to be very much dependable on your geographical location and cultural background of that particular country. And other countries are doing amazing things. So it is very important for us to see what other countries are doing and implement that into our DEI initiatives here in the US, because what's happening, again, what's going to happen, that's my biggest frustration with the law, is that it's very slow in keeping up with the times. So if we keep our eyes open to see what other countries are doing, they're doing great things. New Zealand, South Korea, India, the Nordic countries are doing amazing things. We can easily implement that into internal policies and DEI initiatives and be a little bit more proactive about the fact that, DEI is not, the US is not the center of the world. And we need to recognize that. And once we recognize that, we're going to be a little bit more culturally competent with the work that we're doing in DEI.
So I've had a few questions coming in, and I'm trying to pick out maybe some recurring themes just so we can try to answer as many as possible. So this is probably something that you have all been asked like a million times, but how do you measure success? And how do you, yeah, I know. And how do you track progress without it seeming like a checkbox or like a lip service? Like, how do you genuinely measure inclusivity, belonging, representation, or what, whatever aspect it is? And what do you recommend people who are maybe new or starting programs and initiatives focus on?
Well, I'll say this. I think my first piece of advice is please work with your legal teams at all times, right? I think you got to make friends with your legal and communications team in this line of work because they are huge partners. That how you measure question is always such a good one, right? And you got to be able to find different ways. I think for us, we really care about how people feel in the hallways, right? Engagement to us is a really big way that we try to anchor on if we're having success or not, right? And engagement could be, hey, we've rolled out our Better With You dialogues, right? Where every quarter, different parts of our business are going to bring people to the forefront. They're just going to have a panel discussion about where they're from and their experiences, right? Like really trying to build that culture where you can see yourself in it. And are people going to that, right? From an attendance perspective, where is the heightened level of attendance, or what's the high level of achievement in the Teams chat when who was speaking and what question was asked, right? So you always try to, we always try to really anchor to engagement. And then, yeah, we have things like aspirational representation goals, right? Where again, we're always going to hire the best candidates, always non-negotiable. That's what our patients need. That's what our patients deserve. That's what we're going to deliver. But yeah, we want to track how we're making progress toward greater representation, right? That matters. So we're going to have obviously metrics like that as well. And I think it's really, again, finding the metrics within the processes that you currently have, right? Ensuring that DEI is embedded in every single one of those processes. So you have something to track, right? And I think it's just about reverse engineering from there. But my biggest piece of advice, I'm sure Warner will agree, is again, just partner with your legal friends and make sure that, you're doing things that I always say, we're always doing the right things. We just want to make sure everyone knows we're communicating and doing the right things, right? It's always mostly about language and how you're approaching things and less about, we have found less about the actual work that we're doing, right? Being any kind of legal risk. So that would be my high level piece of advice.
Thanks, Jean. Anyone else?
I think I can jump in. I think that, of course, you're going to have your typical quantitative measures to measure success. You have membership engagement, you have growth of membership in ERGs, you have employee satisfaction surveys, and then you have your qualitative measures, which is basically employee testimonials and stories. You have success stories and case studies. You have, impact on organizational policies, something that we're doing here with our friends at the legal team. But I think that it is very important to recognize that what we're trying to do here is measure the human condition, measure human experiences. And when we're trying to do that, I think that focusing exclusively on one or the other, it is not the way to go. I think that it's very important for us to recognize that is, that what we're trying to do here is bring up to the table the human experiences within the organization. And the best way to do this is through mixed methodologies, right? You have your data set points, but also you're doing listening tours, basically having it being on the ground with the workforce, listening to what's up, how are you doing? How the impacts of societal changes are impacting you within the parameters of the company. How the political climate is also impacting you. How can we keep you safe? And I think that's very important. Recognize that what we're trying to do here is work with the human condition. And in order for us to do that, we need to be a little bit more proactive in the way that we measure the success of the DEI initiative. So not exclusively quantitative, not exclusively qualitative. Let's mix them both.
So I know that we're basically coming to time here. So I just want to ask if you have any parting thoughts. We're going to basically wrap it up. Any final words of wisdom, so to speak, that you want to share with who's on the call?
I think my final word is and this is to all of the DEI practitioners. There are people that are very passionate about this. Right, keep up. Traditionally speaking, we are going through what we call the wave effect. Right, there was a huge wave, and then the wave is falling back. But the work is very much needed. Right, lives of people literally are very much dependent on this line of work. So I think it's very important that we remain positive, that we remain connected, that this work cannot be isolated. It is completely and utterly impossible to do this line of work by yourself. You need to have a strong network of people supporting you within the parameters of the company, but also outside. So be open to bring up expertises and different lived experiences into your equation. And we're here to help.
Suki, anything to add?
So my desire, and I think the desire of everyone here, is that hopefully someday there isn't a need for specific positions that are pushing for DEI, because it is so embedded in the culture of all the workplaces that you don't need a special call out.
Yes. In an ideal world, our work would not exist. Our jobs would not be existing. That's the goal.
So until then, we're here. and we are going to be your partners. Please reach out to us. We want to work with you.
Great.
Yeah,
Well,
I'd echo that, and keep listening. This work has to understand, the climate, has to understand employee sentiment. The more that we can listen and be aware of how we've got to where we are today and where we can go in the future, the better we'll be. And as Suki said, there's organizations like our own that are there to support our members and those trying to get this right. So, to all those who have attended today, that's a great step towards that.
I'll piggyback off Suki. I think just continue to network with each other, right? I think a win in one organization in this line of work can be wins for so many others, right? So let's continue to just build that environment where we can reach out. I've done it when I first got into this role, and so many people have reached out, been willing to share, and it's really powerful. Continue the fight, right? It's an uphill climb, and it's a very unique year for this year being an election year, and know that, step into that, right? And be able to be agile. And then, just don't forget why you do it, right? Don't forget why you do it. I think it's always really important to really anchor to why you do it and why you're doing it for your organization. So I would say for me, those are the big three takeaways.
thank you so much, everyone. That was amazing. Great conversation. Just a reminder that we'll follow up with a link to watch this on demand, just in case anyone would like to go back to something or wasn't able to make the live session, and we'll also be sharing the report that was referenced as well. Thanks so much, everyone. Hope you have a great afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your week, and yeah, keep on keeping on. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.